Hey folks! Active recall is one of the most efficient and effective evidence-based ways to learn pretty much anything. Just check out all of the research. But with hundreds and hundreds of videos on YouTube talking about active recall, it can be difficult to know exactly how to implement active recall techniques that work for you into your own study habits. So hit that subscribe button, and over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to dive into 15 of the easiest ways that you can start using active recall right now that will improve your grades and help you learn more effectively and efficiently so you don't have to spend all of your time studying. Now, the first way to use active recall effectively is to test yourself before the initial learning event happens to activate your prior learning before a class or a lesson. When we encode new information, we link it to what we already know. Therefore, to reduce our cognitive load, it's important that we quickly go over our existing knowledge ahead of a class or new learning event. Going over what you studied at your last study session ahead of starting a new study session or lesson activates your prior knowledge, and you'll then be able to more easily link new content to what you've previously learned. And this is known as activating your prior knowledge. Now, research shows that you learn new content better when the content of what you're learning is relevant to you. And that means you know why it matters, and you know why you're going to learn it and how you're going to use it. Priming involves introducing new material before the lesson or primary learning event occurs. This is often done in lessons and books using learning outcomes, but this might not be that relevant to you or grab your attention effectively. This is where active recall comes in. Before you start learning something new, just take a few minutes and ask yourself 3 key questions. Firstly, what will I do with what I learn? Secondly, what questions do I have about it before I start? And finally, what do I already know about this new topic? This will help you to identify personal relevance, and it will start pulling out your existing knowledge and get you to link new content to past experiences to aid effective encoding. This active recall method is super quick and should only take you a few minutes. Now, it might sound counterintuitive, but the next way to use active recall is to test yourself on a topic before you've even opened a textbook. When you test yourself without prior learning, you'll either be very confident you know the answer, or completely uncertain, or your confidence will be somewhere in between. Now, you might think that the less confident someone is in their response, the more easily they'll update their memory when they hear the correct answer. But that's not actually the case. Research has shown that people learn best when they get feedback on a mistake that they're confident in. This is something known as the hypercorrection effect, which was outlined by educational researchers Janet Metcalf and Brady Butterfield in 2001. The hypercorrection effect states that making high confidence mistakes rather than making low confidence errors is more surprising and therefore more memorable. The idea is that when we get feedback that goes against what we expect, we pay more attention to it. And because we pay more attention, we're better able to remember the feedback that we get. So in essence, surprising feedback means we pay more attention, which means we remember better. Taking a small quiz before you start learning allows you to benefit from the hypercorrection effect, as even if you have no clue about the answer, after learning the correct answer, your brain will try not to make the same mistake during the actual exam. Your primary learning event is basically the first time you go over new content. This might be a class, an online video, or reading a book. While it's easy to write notes, highlight, or bookmark things, this isn't actually an effective way to learn. It just feels like it is. A better way to engage with the new material is to turn the information into questions. For definitions and facts, you might want to use what is type questions. For processes, methods, procedures, or techniques, you might want to use how questions. And to test your deeper understanding of new content, you might want to ask yourself, why does this happen? A really quick way to generate lots of questions is to turn headings or subheadings into questions by adding what, how, and why in front of them. This will then stimulate your curiosity at or before the initial learning event and means you'll have a list of questions you can revisit at a later time. When working through content from slides, video, or books, it's easy to just sit back passively and think that you're learning. A much better way is to use active recall in the form of stopping and reciting, or what's known as the closed book method. If you're reading, at the end of each paragraph or section, close your book or cover up the paragraph and try and explain it back. You can write it out, say it out loud, or just think about what you've learned in your head. Once you've finished, go back to the source material and see how you did. For videos, you can pause after each section and do the same thing. By stopping, you're naturally breaking up what you're learning into smaller, more meaningful bite-sized chunks, and by reciting what you've learned in your own words, you're ensuring that you're learning as you go along. At the end of class, the end of a book chapter, the end of a video, or the end of a specific study session, you can use active recall to immediately review everything you've learned and test your knowledge. This forces you to immediately revisit the material and is a longer version of the stop and recite method, which covers a similar concept. Using active recall in this way highlights your weak areas and any gaps in your knowledge that you need to go back over, and it also gives you a good idea about how well you know each individual topic you're testing yourself on. If you know it well, you can probably leave it a bit longer before revisiting again using spaced repetition. Whereas if you're really struggling with a topic, you might need to revisit it sooner and attack it head on. Similar to the closed book method, another way to recall information and test yourself is to draw out a mind map. To do this, start with a blank piece of paper or grab your Apple Pencil, iPad and a drawing or note-taking app. Then, put the topic or concept that you're studying at the center. Next, draw out everything you can recall about the topic from the center and start connecting things together. This not only gets you to think about what you know, but it also forces you to consider structure and how things relate to one another as you learn. Similar to note-taking, lots of people use mind maps incorrectly. They just transcribe or copy information from books or videos into a mind map diagram and then make them colorful and pretty without actually engaging their brains or self-testing. When used correctly, mind maps should challenge you to recall information around a central topic and link information together. Remember, you're not just limited to text. You can draw images, add phrases, and make key concepts stand out as bold. If you're not sure about something, you can even add a question mark and highlight this as an area you need to go over in the future, or just add in little drawings. Now, similar to mind maps, another great way to combine visual learning with active recall is to challenge yourself to draw or annotate diagrams. In science subjects, this might be identifying the structures of a cell from an image. In anatomy, this might be testing yourself to draw the brachial plexus from scratch, or in math, to draw and label the angles and trigonometry calculations around a specific shape. You might want to start off with labeling an existing diagram, as this is a quick and effective way to use active recall, and it reduces your cognitive load by functioning like a worked example where the scaffolding is provided in the diagram and you just need to get down to labeling things. For more of a challenge, try moving up Bloom's taxonomy and drawing a diagram or concept from scratch. After you've drawn or labeled, go back to the source material and see how you did. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of using flashcards to learn, as they really focus on the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy, where you're just rote memorizing facts, rather than more deeply understanding and applying knowledge. That being said, they're a valid form of active recall, and if you need to learn specific facts such as vocab in a language, or specific terms in science, they're pretty quick to use. You can either create your own flashcards, which can be time consuming, or use existing flashcard sets on apps like Quizlet, Chicken, or Anki. Most of these apps have spacing intervals built in too, which means you can come back to cards at appropriate times to retest your knowledge so that you remember facts for longer. Richard Feynman was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist and was also known as the Great Explainer for his ability to explain complex topics in simple terms that anyone could understand. The Feynman Technique is simply the ability to explain a topic that you are learning in language that a child could understand. By putting a topic into your own words and simplifying it, you're really testing your deep understanding. You can combine this with active recall by challenging yourself at the end of a book chapter, video, or study session to explain what you've just learned in simple terms. You can do this by summarizing back to yourself, or even better, explaining the topic to a friend or family member. Now, if you can't explain the topic simply, or you can't remember elements of it, you probably don't know it well enough and you need to go back over and revisit it using active recall again. Being able to create materials and teach others is at the top of Bloom's taxonomy, and the process of creating a teaching session forces you to actively recall the topic you're teaching, which leads to better learning. Planning out a teaching session also means you'll need to provide structure to your lesson, and you might need to dive deeper into the topic itself so that you can explain it simply and correctly to learners. Creating teaching materials is an active process, and you may also preempt the questions that learners might ask you, and it gives you a little bit more insight into what others might find confusing around the topic, so that you get a deeper level of understanding. Learning with others keeps you accountable, and asking a study partner to select questions from a text can make learning much more social, as well as testing your recall. The process of saying answers out loud and explaining things in your own words helps you to develop a deeper understanding of the topic. Plus, having a friend put you on the spot will test your knowledge under pressure. This method helps to make learning more fun as you challenge each other, and when someone gets a question incorrect, the process of teaching your partner will help to further embed your knowledge. This use of active recall is really effective for practical subjects, such as learning history and examination techniques for medical OSCEs, preparing for interviews, or learning a language, where your friend takes on the role of an examiner, interviewer, or patient to give you the most realistic practice possible for these types of questions. Jumping into large volumes of questions that accurately represent the questions you'll be tested on at a final exam or test is, in my opinion, the best way and most effective way to study for exams. Questions that require you to apply your knowledge and which come with explanations are way better than flashcards for deepening your understanding. Multiple choice questions that require you to choose the correct answer, order a selection of answers, or write out a short explanation actively test your knowledge using active recall. Some exam question banks allow you to filter questions by subject and topic area, and so you can read a chapter and then immediately test your knowledge of that topic area in a focused way. And many question banks also gamify the experience and allow you to filter by whether you've attempted a question previously or answered it incorrectly, so that you can quickly focus your study session on your knowledge gaps. Now, don't worry about failing, and rather see every incorrect answer as a way to learn something new and identify which areas you're weakest at. Just like testing yourself before you've learned a topic, it might seem counterintuitive, but jumping straight into exam conditions can help you to recall information more effectively and reduce stress at the real test. If you can get hold of past paper questions or mock exams and use active recall to try and get through an exam paper early, this gives you a really good idea of the standard of knowledge required as well as the difficulty of the test itself. When you then subsequently study topics, you'll know how much depth of learning is required and ensure you're studying and using active recall at an appropriate difficulty level. This will keep you engaged, and most exams and tests have questions that come up again and again. If you can focus on practicing these high-yield, commonly tested questions, you'll likely do really well. If your test or exam is something like graded essays or a spoken oral test, you can also apply active recall under time conditions by writing out essays or conversations in advance. If you have past papers and an idea of high-yield essay topics, you can basically practice writing these out in advance, learning them, and then at the actual exam, you'll have already prepared these essays and you'll just need to write them out from memory. This is also a great technique that works well for interviews, where you can plan out your answers to commonly asked questions like, why do you want this job? And then recite them at the interview, focusing instead on your delivery. This is exactly what I did when I learned and delivered my TED Talk. Now, the 15th and final way to use active recall is to simply practice and apply what you're learning in the real world. By applying your knowledge for real, you're constantly testing your own ability. If you're learning a language, going to the country of the language you're learning and practicing with native speakers and immersing yourself in the culture is the best possible way that you can learn. This builds personal and emotional experiences that are easier to recall, and it's also way more fun than just learning theory. If you're learning something practical like I did with surgery, you can test yourself on the steps of a procedure, then practice on a mannequin before doing focused individual steps under supervision, and then finally doing it completely yourself. The more you can put what you're learning into practice and use your knowledge, the better you'll learn. So that was 15 different ways to use active recall. I hope that gives you some practical insights into ways that you can start using active recall right now for whatever you're studying. Don't forget to check out my other videos on some of the science behind active recall and some of the other evidence-based study methods that you can use right now. If you've got any other ways of using active recall, do let me know in the comments down below. And thanks so much for watching, thanks so much for subscribing, and I'll catch you again in the next video.